2.
One.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, everybody.
Welcome back to Two Idiots on a Banana.
There's no bananas present.
You don't know that.
You silly little goose.
Welcome back to... Yeah, I don't know. I said welcome back to the episode, and I blanked on really what else I could say welcome back to, because I forgot what episode number we're actually on.
Dude,
The episode numbers are weird, so at some point when I actually upload, I will look at the number of episodes that are posted, so when we go to record, we can actually say that.
Ooh,
So
can you do
that'll probably be
that
the
one
next
thing
episode.
where, like, when you you'll dub over it with, like, a robotic voice? So, like, episode number 4.
What if I just, like, dub over it with, like, my own voice?
Oh, no, I thought the robotic one
Just
was
like
just a little
4.
funnier.
Just very
comedy.
monotone. Nah, comedy doesn't exist here. So we have no idea what to talk about because we didn't actually plan for this. But you brought up a really good point because you said balls before we went live, and we went to a store called Micro Center yesterday. And if you don't know Micro Center, I think it's actually nationwide, but it's a computer store, kind of like a Best Buy or like. I don't know, Circuit City doesn't exist anymore. Or like a PC Richards. I don't know. It's pretty much an electronics store, but it focuses way more on like the like building and gaming aspect of things. So there's way more peripherals there, like headsets, keyboards, monitors. They have 3D printers. It's sort of like a more nerdy version of Best Buy. Yeah, it is nerds heaven. And they have like things that Best Buy wouldn't have. You know, they have like I got standoff screws for building a computer.
I was kind of surprised, but at the same time, I was actually like, "Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense."
I figured that if they have a whole build your own computer section, so you go there and you can go step by step. Like there's an aisle that's got cases in it, and then you can go and you can get your cable ties and like cable mod cables for your power supply. They have a whole section for like expansion cards, like PCIe expansion cards. They have graphics card section, motherboard section, hard drive. So they have everything there, and you can just go aisle by aisle and get everything you need. And it's actually very, very cool. We actually saw a bajillion graphics cards, which is crazy to see.
Yeah, that actually kind of surprised me myself.
They're still expensive, but they're not crazy over MSRP, but they're still relatively up there. They limit one per person, so that's why they still have them in stock. Because I remember,
So
even like 8
all
months
went
ago.
in and bought like one each. That's still technically under their rules of one per person, right?
Sure, but I
But
mean,
would
that's
they,
not
like,
like a
consider that,
business strategy.
Would they consider that their?
No, one per person.
Oh, well,
That's it.
just,
Well, I'm one person, you're one person.
No, I know, but it's just like one of those things where it's like, oh, they found a loophole and they're just gonna resell them, kind of,
No, yeah, but that doesn't matter. So let's say, the resellers, what they were doing is they were buying like 50 at a time,
Yeah.
or like 20 at a time.
Yeah.
You would need 20 people to go do that, and then what's in it for all 20 people? One graphics card? That's nothing. Like the whole business of reselling is that you're one person reselling a whole bunch of stuff. So that stops people. Like it's the same thing with iPhones. Like when iPhones launch, you get a bunch of resellers that come in and they buy one and they go back in line because they're only allowed to get, actually, I think with iPhones say that you get like 2 or something like that. And then they just go back in line and they get 2. But the whole thing is they need to go to the back of the line. Apple doesn't stop them from just getting back in line, but
Oh, really?
yeah, but I mean,
That's
like, that doesn't really matter. But they'll get back in line. They'll just get 2. But they're still limited to 2. So they have a whole bunch of people that go there, but then they spend all day standing in line. So if we actually just limited it to 2 phones, there would really be no resellers until weeks after the phone's out because there would be no point. They're like, if we can't send like 200 phones back to, whatever country we're going to resell these in, then what's the point of doing that?
I mean, I've seen a thing where but yeah, if they have like friends and family, they just give them like a small portion. Like, hey, if you come with me, I'll give you $50 just to buy these with my money.
No, that is what they do.
Yeah.
Like I talked to those resellers, but still, they're getting hundreds of iPhones when they do that.
Right.
If you're still only gonna get one GPU,
right?
That's
you
gonna
just have to have
and they also take your ID when they do that. So
they do.
Yeah. And the resellers, they need to fill. So the way that works is they have to fill shipments. So they have a buyer in whatever country they're going to resell them to, and the buyer says, "Hey, you need to fill the shipment of 500 iPhones, and we'll buy them for this much." And then that's what they do. And if they don't fill that shipment, then they don't get the money.
Mm.
And a lot of times you get a lot of people coming to return iPhones to
I see.
the Apple Store. But for the most part, they'll just find another buyer who will buy a smaller shipment of whatever. But they tell a buyer that they'll get the bigger shipment. So they need to buy that many. So for graphics cards, if you're going to resell one, is it worth it to go and buy one for $200 less than eBay and then sell it to make $200? Probably not. And to have 8 of your friends do it, it wouldn't really be worth it. That's not
fair.
That's not
I don't think about the logistics of things. I just kind of set plans in motion, and then they just kind of go downhill from there.
Well, luckily the people at Micro Center do think about logistics, and they realize that would stop people from buying all the graphics cards because resellers. Because also, here's the thing: if I could just go in and buy them, why the heck would I work with you and do it when I could just resell my own and make the most money?
Is this a rhetorical question?
I'm just saying, it just it doesn't That's why it stops them. It's just there's so many other things at play. The reason the other people, well, when you said I'll just tell my friends and family stuff to come and buy the iPhones with them, the reason that works is because they don't have the same contacts to sell to buyers. But a lot of times they do that. So sometimes you have these groups of people that work, and the next year they'll be split up and they'll have 2 separate groups. So they know who they are, but then they're they're the competition, because they split up because someone found a way to find buyers in another country, and they're I can make more money if I just do the selling instead of just being someone that stands in line and buys phones.
Right.
So, they figured it out. Apple got around that by just launching in a lot more countries at once, because the reason that was a huge problem was Apple, when they released phones, would only release them in I think at first they released in the US, and then that was it, and you could only get US phones. And then they started to release in big places, I think a few places in Europe, Germany and the UK. I know the UK is not Europe, don't come at me. I'm more just saying other places in the world that also got launches. So I think the UK and places in Europe Germany would launch. But I think the thing that really started to make that not be huge is I think Apple started to release in China on launch day or very close to launch day. So there's really no point in buying those phones and shipping them, because if it was going to release the next week, or if it was already releasing on launch day, then there were really no people trying to get one to resell. There's still a little bit, but it stopped way more. I remember my first launch there was the iPhone 6S. And I remember they're you're going to see lines of people. You're going to see the same people come in, buy 2 phones, and get back line and everything. It's those are resellers. They come in, they buy phones, and they ship them other places. And I remember that year, it was 4 or 5 days after launch. And we still had quite a few iPhones, but we were still running really low. But they'll buy any phone as long as the phone will work other countries, because Apple actually did a thing where they didn't country lock phones after a certain point, so every model phone worked with every carrier pretty much, except the Sprint model didn't work overseas or something like that.
That's interesting. So because I don't know how phones work today, if they're still locked by carrier.
Yeah, well, so so that depends, right? So the thing with iPhones is iPhones for a super long time were never really they were never hardware locked. It was always a software lock that your carrier put on it. They would lock the IMEI number on your phone.
Because I remember when
and they still do that.
When my brother had gotten his very first iPhone 3G, and
those had to do with antenna bands for that one.
Got it. Because the guy there's a guy who was unlocking his iPhones, and he charged us, but an idiot the guy was, left his SIM card with us. It was an unlocked, you know what I mean?
Yeah, so the way the old iPhones worked is that they had different bands in them. So you had bands that only worked with CDMA, which was pretty much an American only thing, and there was a couple places, I think there's a few carriers in the UK. No, actually no, UK isn't. I think it's Germany or something like that uses CDMA. And every other carrier in the world was GSM. And every other carrier in the US was GSM. So the only 2 that were CDMA were Verizon and Sprint. And so if you got a Verizon or a Sprint model phone, your phone was locked to those carriers, and even if you unlocked it, it still wouldn't really work overseas because there were no CDMA carriers in most places overseas. If you had the AT&T and the T-Mobile model, Those phones usually would work overseas, but at the time they were carrier locked, and carriers would charge you to unlock them. I believe there was a
That I
lawsuit
remember.
about that because someone said this is my phone, like it's paid off, and I'm moving out of the country, like I should be allowed to do it. So there was a lawsuit, and carriers then had to unlock phones for free as long as the person was paid up on their bill and their phone was theirs. Because the way the subsidies used to work, you had your 2-year contract. The reason your phone was locked is so you couldn't leave the carrier
Right.
because
Right.
like you were already paying for that phone by being locked in that 2-year contract. Like they charged you a fee, and the fee was supposed to go away after your 2-year contract, but a lot of times they didn't do that either because they're not supposed to change your plan unless you tell them to. So it actually made sense to always get new phones with 2-year contracts. Otherwise, you were overpaying on your phone bill, basically. And so your phone was locked that way. Now, because you can do the 2-year installment on phones, that's why your phone's locked, because you're paying the carrier for your phone.
Got it.
So the reason that if you go to Apple and you do like the iPhone upgrade program, or you just buy the phone outright, no matter what model you get, I think still besides the Sprint model, it works in every other country. The thing is, I think the Verizon and the Sprint models, they might have changed this already because I haven't been at Apple in a couple of years. But I believe the Verizon and Sprint models, while they had GSM bands in them, there were specific bands that certain GSM carriers used that weren't present there. So the phone would work, but it wouldn't be as fast on certain networks and stuff like that.
So you said it's still an issue with Sprint models?
The Sprint model
But I thought
phone,
Sprint merged it. Wasn't it T-Mobile or something?
So that went through, but they're not fully merged yet, I don't think. So I think they're still working. So there's 4 major carriers in the U.S. There's Sprint, T-Mobile, Verizon, and AT&T. There's technically only 2 major carriers. There's Verizon and AT&T. Verizon lends their antennas and their service basically to Sprint. So they're like, we have this much stuff, like you can use some of our towers and things like that, which is why a lot of times like the Sprint network matches up to a lot of the towers that Verizon has. And so in a lot of bigger areas, you're using Verizon towers with Sprint that Sprint is like renting from Verizon. T-Mobile uses AT&T towers. That's a lot of times why AT&T and Verizon, or AT&T and T-Mobile have similar coverage as well, because a lot of places you go, there'll be towers that T-Mobile's renting from AT&T. T-Mobile also has their own towers, and Sprint also has their own towers, but the only reason they're allowed to be the other major carriers is because the government stepped in, and the FCC every once in a while will do these bids on spectrum that you can buy. And the government set aside spectrum that Sprint and AT&T could bid each other for, and that AT&T and Verizon had to stay out of, because obviously AT&T and Verizon would be able to outbid the other two.
Right.
So in order to make it fair, they set aside things for there, which to a lot of people is very anti-capitalism. But if you only had 2 carriers, like right now, AT&T and Verizon are still technically 2 of the more major carriers. They still have the most bands, the most spectrum, and they have the biggest reach out of all of the places, which is why the government ultimately let Sprint and T-Mobile merge, because with all of the spectrum that they have combined, they got to actually be 3 actual major carriers instead of just the 2 big guys and then the 2 little guys.
Got it.
I think they're still in the process of merging and stuff like that. I can't remember if it got blocked at one point, and then
because I feel like
they decided to not merge. Well, so they
ongoing for like 2 years now.
Well, so they decided to actually do it. Well, government's slow, but they decided to actually sign the deal, I believe. Then they had to wait for the FCC for antitrust reasons to approve the deal, and that took a while. And
this is actually back in 2018.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I worked at Apple when that hasn't. I stopped working at Apple in 2018. So, and I heard that in the middle of me working at Apple. So that's been a thing since 2016 that they were talking about merging, and I think they officially announced it in 2018. But I can't remember if I can't remember if it's still happening. I think it's still happening, but I have no idea. But yeah, it's just better that they're merging because it just makes a little bit better at competition. People are worried though, because then they think that Sprint and T-Mobile aren't going to be offering prices that are as low as they are compared to the other carriers. And T-Mobile is cheaper than the other carriers, same with Sprint. but their service is like kind of So like at this point, like if T-Mobile has as good service as Verizon and AT&T and their price is lower and more people start moving to there, then Verizon and AT&T will feel like, okay, I can, like, we have to lower our price to match them and stuff like that, you know? So that's where you get your competition stuff. So it's going to make for a better competition. Maybe. Having 3 instead of 2 doesn't necessarily mean that they're all not going to like.
I just feel like sometimes people go with the name brand that generally speaks for itself, right? Like,
well, not even that. It's more so like if you have an oligopoly, like, because 3 companies still would be considered an oligopoly. Like one company who's just like, you know, we're gonna charge $200 for our service, and then the other 2 companies could just be like, you know, if we also charge $200, then we can just like make just as much money as them, you know?
Yeah.
So for industries that are like kind of split like that, you know, they could just not try and compete, and they could just try and like do what's best for all of them, and then they realize that they can all like do really well. The thing is, I think because AT&T and Verizon are big name brands, T-Mobile is actually going to be a big player in bouncing that out. But if T-Mobile starts to get a pretty good market share of all the phone companies, like, they might just be like, okay, well, now that we're all even, let's just like price ourselves at the same, you know? Because going from Verizon and AT&T, like, people swear by one or the other, they're both the same shitty companies. Like, service in one area works better. Like, people have Verizon, they're like, Verizon's the best, it works everywhere. And then people have AT&T go, oh, AT&T's the best, it works everywhere. I had Verizon one time and it sucked. And then the AT&T person's like, the Verizon person's like, I had AT&T and they sucked, you know? So it's like,
what's funny is like I had AT&T and I have T-Mobile, and I honestly couldn't tell you that much of a difference.
So we switched to T-Mobile, and my dad and sister had a lot of issues on their commutes to work because they commute across the state lines, and they were having issues on back roads on their way home in places that they had service with AT&T before. So like they noticed that. I haven't noticed any like speed issues or really service issues in most places I go, but when you're in like an urban place, like it's really hard to not have phone service with any company. It's really like super busy places if their towers are strong enough, right? So like New York City, for instance, they have great service from all the places. However, you actually might not get good speed or service because there's just so many people there.
Right.
So you'll have 5, but right. So it's kind of like when you're at like a convention or a baseball game or whatever, and it's like halftime and everyone's phone doesn't work. It's because there's just so many people on their phone. Or like, you know, we've gone to like Warped Tour, like really just big concerts and things like that. If there's just that many people there, because you're only still connecting to the same 2 towers as everybody else, you know, like there's a lot of issues with connectivity. So if you have a carrier that's got better towers, it's more equipped for more people, which is usually the more expensive company, like that probably happens less. So like Verizon, for instance, probably works way better in the city than T-Mobile does. But, you know, we don't live there. So, like we live in an urban place where...
I live in Canada. I don't know what you're talking
about. Well, we live in an urban place, or like a suburban/urban place that isn't like so densely populated. So we don't really have that issue. Because the infrastructure actually works.
Right.
But, like, they legally have to unlock the phones, which is why a lot of people just buy their phones full price. Like, if you buy a full price phone from Apple, it's just unlocked. Even if you put, like, your carrier SIM in it, you could take the SIM out and just swap it out as long as you pay full price. Which is pretty much what I do with phones, so that way you can do that. So once that happened, a lot more people started to like ship phones overseas, but then Apple just started launching everywhere, and the reason they did that is so that way they could just use the same phones in all of the different places instead of having to print like a model for Europe and then a model for like China and stuff like that. They just had the same model that worked across all the countries, and then they could just release it, and that's why it's released more places. You still have people that buy because like Apple, I think, still puts most of its inventory into the US first and then goes to the other places. But, you know, you only get those people to buy phones for like a week, you know? Because I remember like 6S launch, we did that. Those phones, pretty much all of them worked, I think, except the Sprint model. So we were selling all of them. And then like 4 or 5 days, they were like, oh, they all stopped coming in. Except one guy. There was one guy who was still filling orders. So we were talking. We were like, oh, why? And he was like, well, now they're available in all the other places, so no one really wants to buy them. And he's like, they're pretty healthy stock there, too. So, like, you know, there's no need to, like, send them overseas. He's like, I just got one last one that someone's paying for. So, you know,
Yeah, okay. I was gonna say, so why is he still there?
Yeah,
But I guess
right.
you just answered my question. I just had to wait and listen.
Yeah, so it's definitely interesting just to see like how that's changed because again, like I remember talking because they were all surprised and I was like, oh, like why are you guys surprised? They were like because they used to come in for like months. Like they were like for 2 or 3 months we would have resellers in here buying phones because they want to sell them overseas. Like because even though they launched overseas, because Apple used to launch phones like maybe a month or two after overseas. Even though they were launched, there still was so few of them
Yeah.
that like they did it. But now that
Everyone just
Apple
want to get their new iPhone fix.
yeah. But now that they all, pretty much launch simultaneously and Apple does like a pretty good job of inventory with all those places, like we only got them for a few days. I'm sure it's still the same now. Like we had a pretty big chunk for people for iPhone 10s, but around that time there was a shortage anyway for I can't remember if it was for screens or microchips. That's why the iPhone 10
I think
launched.
it was the screens, if I remember correctly.
It totally could have been, but that might be why. Oh, you're right, because the other phone companies were buying
From
so many.
Samsung, right?
Well, because there were only two companies, and one was
Samsung and
LG, the
LG,
other was
yeah.
LG. Apple already was helping LG, but LG's factories were way smaller than Samsung's, so Samsung had to split and like max out what you could get. So that's why that iPhone 10 launched 2 months after the
Yeah.
iPhone 8.
I actually remember that because my brother really, really wanted the iPhone 10 when it came out, and he got it.
Yeah,
But
it
when the
wasn't
10s
super
came
hard
out,
to
I
get,
got
but
the 10s. And
it wasn't super hard to get, even though there was a shortage, because Apple made up the shortage by just like waiting until 2 months later. It was harder to get overseas though, so we had quite a few resellers for
right,
those
because
phones.
the 8 came out, and then like what, a month and a half later, the 10 there's like that delayed launch for that reason.
Yeah, so the iPhone 8 launched and it was available to buy like this like last week of September. It was like September 27th
Yep.
or something like that.
I
And the
can't believe you
iPhone
bought it.
10 came out November like 10th or something like
Yeah.
that. So
I
it's
still can't
like
believe you
pretty much
bought
a
that and
month.
then still upgraded.
I worked at Apple. It
I
didn't really
know.
matter. I sold the iPhone 8 and I made the exact amount of money I paid for it.
Did you
So
sell to a family member?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they need a new phone. Because I wasn't going to get the 10. I just had that phone and he was like, my
I don't
phone
know.
broke.
You say that, but I don't believe that.
No, I would have had to sell the phone. Like, I mean, like, I had to have got, like, I'm not gonna have two of the
No,
same
no. I
exact,
just
like.
said you had said you weren't gonna get the 10.
No, like, I wanted the 10, but I
Oh.
wasn't gonna get it until he messaged me and he was
Oh,
like, oh, I need a new
okay.
phone. Like, can you get me a discount? And I was like, I could just give you this phone. Like, I just got it a month ago. He was like, okay. And I was like, it's got Apple Care on it. And he was like, cool.
Cool.
And that was it. And he bought it. And he bought my discounted price for it. And then I bought the iPhone 10 for the discounted price.
Must be nice having perks like that.
That wasn't that big of a decision.
But when it's there, I mean, it's cool. But like, it's not. I just think it's cool to know that there's like a passive kind of.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I mean, here's the thing. I think Apple, because of their reach, had the most amount of benefits out of any company I ever worked for as far as companies. Like, I had access to hotel brands that we would get discounts from. I got discounts at Disney and at Universal. There were discounts for concierge services in a number of cities like Chicago, New York. I could get discounts on buying a car. Like there were car companies that we
really?
worked for where you could get their friends and family discount if you just walked up and showed this card to them. Yeah, it's a huge company, and so they have that much reach in places they work for. And around Christmas time, there are discounts on, accessories that other brands will get you. So like, if there's Bose headphones, they might do a special with Apple where the discount for those is better. So like sometimes it'll be like 35% instead of the normal like 10% you would get on them and stuff. So like I remember one year there's a lot of people that were buying the Philips Hue lights because we sold the starter pack
yep,
for them. And there was a discount for the starter pack that was like 45% off. So I remember having it.
I remember because I had that. I believe that was the Hue Go bulb and all that.
It was, but that one was a lot less. The Hue Go bulb I think was like.
I had gotten that as a Christmas present because
Yeah, because we had another friend that worked there, and then
Yeah.
you're
I didn't get the starter pack. That was just the bulb. We didn't know it needed the bridge.
well,
So
because they didn't sell that in the start. Like there was no starter pack with the Go.
oh,
So the
gotcha.
starter pack, you could either get the white lamp starter pack or the color lamp starter pack. The color was 2 color bulbs, the bridge, and
I see.
a was it a remote? There might
I
have
don't
been like
think
a
it was a
little
remote because like it was all controlled from the app even
There were
back then.
4 things in there. No, the app was still a thing, but I think they had a remote for the just for like turning them on and off. Like it wasn't to change the color or anything. Um, and then you could just buy the other starter pack, which was the white lamps, and that was 2 white bulbs, this bridge.
I was gonna say I don't mean to
remote.
like interject and like interrupt your sentence there, but thinking about it now, like I love the Philips products, but why the fuck are they so expensive?
Well, they're cheaper now. Like so, we have
No, but like
the Philips Hue things are different, right? So the reason they're expensive is the
let's compare that to the Whiz bulbs. They offer the same
those are also
functionality.
Philips though,
I know,
right?
but like the
But
Philips
they didn't at the same time.
Hue and then the Philips and the Whiz bulbs offer the same functionality.
So the Philips bulbs at the time, they were the only company that had
Right.
Wi-Fi bulbs.
Right.
So that's why you needed the bridge. They didn't have a way to build
I just-
in the Wi-Fi connectivity into the bulb at the time.
I just don't know why Philips, like the Hue itself, has like a good $50 price increase over.
LED bulbs were expensive at the time.
No, but still to this day that holds up.
Well, it's the app. The app has a lot of connectivity to it.
Okay, that's fair.
The app connects to like TV shows or connects to like different sensors. Like you can get the room sensor where it'll match the light, or you can pair it with your TV and it will match the lights to the TV show that you're watching. Like the app itself has a lot of connectivity to it, as well as having everything connect to the bridge actually makes a more seamless connection with a lot of other home products. Like these bulbs are great, but they actually don't really pair with any other thing in this house.
Okay.
So I can't pair this to. I think on Google you might be able to pair it with like a command, but besides that, like
And so I know the Hue can be paired with Siri, so but these bulbs that we're using.
yeah, because the bridge, yeah,
I believe Google Assistant and Alexa work for these bulbs.
yeah, you can do the iPhone 2 with a shortcut, but it's still like that's the limited connectivity.
Got it.
Again, that doesn't mean that everyone's going to want the other bulbs. For most people, these bulbs are perfect because they just want to be able to turn it on and off with their phone,
Yeah.
or say, you know, Alexa, turn off my lights, or Alexa, turn on my lights, and that's pretty much it. But if you wanted connectivity with your apps or your music, or, you know, like I think the Philips Hue bulbs connect with Spotify. You can play the Spotify app through the Hue app, and you can sync your music to it. I think you can do that with your Hue Go.
I don't know. I remember downloading a third-party app. I paid like $3 for.
But yeah, I mean, like syncing these to like any other lights as well, like with light strips and things like that. Like you can do that, but the app isn't really built for that.
Yeah,
The app
that's
is
fair.
just like a set.
'Cause
Like
I think right now I have
picking
like
these colors.
3 different like lighting apps on my phone, and
Yeah.
it's like, thankfully I'm not like out of touch and I know how to use them. But
I believe the
good
Philips
God.
Hue bulbs also have an 18-year warranty on them.
oh, do they really?
Yeah, so like if they ever go out, like the bulb dies, you can replace them.
Yeah.
Whereas like most LED bulbs have like a 5 to 10 year lifespan
I was
on them.
gonna say I do remember seeing like a Reddit post like years ago where this guy said he had like 40 something like bulbs and LED strips and all that, and it's just like a lot of the comments were like judging this guy for like throwing thousands of dollars in, but it's like in a sense I get it. It's actually probably the more ideal route to go for having a smart home. But I think that's the one that's holding me back from even buying more of these bulbs. It's just the price because I can't
I
justify
mean, these
it.
are only like $15.
Yeah.
Like they're not crazy. Like I feel like most homes like where you need to be able to turn them on and off by a remote would be like your bedroom, your living room. Maybe like your outside lights, like if you have like a spotlight under your like on your porch or whatever, like you might want to turn that on and off. But even then, because they're only Wi-Fi, like that's another thing too. These are Wi-Fi, but these only work on your home Wi-Fi. So the Philips Hue and stuff like that, I believe you can control when you're not home. Like you can just connect to the app. The app will connect to the bridge, and the bridge will send your things through.
I do remember doing that with my Google Assistant specifically.
With these bulbs?
No, with
yeah. Yeah, because it works just like the like Ecobee or like the Nest thermostat and stuff like that. Like they connect to your Wi-Fi network, but you can control them outside of your
Yeah.
home, which is these don't have the ability to, because I think these just take direction from your router. So if you're not home, you have no way to like actually connect to your router to do that, which is what I think they use the bridge for with the Hue bulbs.
Interesting.
But it's really cool that like you could do that. So if you had like the Hue bulbs for like your outside light, and like, because I know they even sell Hue bulbs that are the bigger, more spotlight lights as well,
Like
so
the
that way you can
floodlights?
sync them to timers and stuff like that. And
Hmm.
yeah, I mean it's cool. Like I think I would definitely want like a more futuristic home, because it's not that expensive. Like people think it's incredibly expensive, but all you really need for most things in your house, like your coffee machine, for instance, you don't necessarily need a smart coffee machine. You can just get a coffee machine that you set up the night before, and then you plug it into like a special switch. And you can get these switches on Amazon or a ton of places. And all it does is like in the morning, it'll turn it on, and then that'll just make your coffee pot turn on. There are coffee pots that sync up with Alexa and shit like that, but you don't
Who
need.
who was it? Bernie Burns from Rooster Teeth. He
Yeah,
had like a whole.
he had the complete smart home. But the thing is, right, people would think that's crazy, but it's really not, because you can get motors for your blinds. It's
Yep.
just a little tiny motor that you can connect to your current blinds that you have. And I believe they make them for curtains as well, with like a special curtain rod that you
I
can
believe I've
get.
seen those.
And they're not
It's just like a
they're
little thing that
not.
rides on like a track of like a
Yep.
the rod
And
itself.
it's
But
not incredibly expensive. Like it's more than just obviously opening and closing your blinds and stuff like that. But I think it's more so for like the like I have these smart. I use one of these smart bulbs in my room. I still would just get up and turn my light on and off. Like I didn't
yeah,
always like use the remote. Like I don't necessarily think it's a lazy thing. I think it's more of like a cool factor and just sort of living the future. Like the fact that I could just have it set on a timer that in the morning when I get up at 8 o'clock or whatever, my blinds open. You know, like in the
yeah,
kitchen, and the coffee
yeah.
pot starts itself. And it's kind of just more like it's just cool. Like it's not needed for any of that stuff. Like all that stuff is they're all luxury items in a sense of like you don't need them. But I mean like, most things are luxury items. Like a coffee pot's a luxury item, So it's like it's just like getting to that next step and like doing that stuff because it brings like joy and it's cool to have.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
kind of like having an automatic door opener. It's just like if you have a button that opens your door, like I'm sure at the time when it first came out, people were like, "You're just lazy, just get out and open your garage." But it's
Yeah.
like, no, it's very convenient just to be able to like, go up to your door, hit the button, and then opens. Now cars have automatic triggers for that. When you just pull up to your garage, it just opens itself, like and stuff like that is super just convenient and helpful. Again, it's not needed. I could just get out and open the garage with my hands and then stuff like
Yeah.
that. But it's just cool to have that stuff. It's just convenient. So I kind of think that's where a lot of that smart home stuff is next level. Like we use Alexa lights upstairs, and so like every day they'll just be sitting down, they'll like go to have dinner or whatever, and they'll just be like, Alexa, living room lights on, and the lights just come on. So
Yeah.
it's like it's a cool thing to.
Can I just say, like,
Incorporate.
can you imagine if that microphone for Alexa is really sensitive and you just turned it
Oh,
on
it's
the other
not.
way?
Dude, you could be like across the room and shout, and it
no,
still
I just
won't.
kicked my tripod from my camera.
It still won't pick it up. I realize I've like sunken down a lot in my chair. But I think I think they're really cool advancements, and I think there's a lot of cool things to come. Like there's a lot of things that I think are super not necessarily because there's no real benefit to them. Like having your blinds and stuff open is really just more of like a cool feeling. Like you could just wake up and you could just be multitasking,
Yeah.
versus like the smart fridge that has a camera in it. It's like that's kind of stupid,
Yeah.
Or like the double tap to see inside your fridge. It's like just open your fridge,
Yeah.
like the amount of money that you're saving by not opening your fridge to see if something's in there or whatever, or like to look around before you open it.
It's very minuscule, I'd imagine.
Right, compared to the price of the
The
fridge
fridge.
that you're paying. You're saving like $10 over the whole life of the fridge versus the $500 it costs to get the tap to show or whatever.
Right.
It's cool. I like people were like when you're at the grocery store, you can like look at it and see if you forgot something. It's like just make a list.
Yeah.
It's like I don't think I've ever like had that. Like there's definitely a fine line between that. I think there's like some things that are really cool, and then some things that just really aren't useful.
Yeah.
The whole reason I brought up Micro Center before though, and we got on like this gigantic tangent. Was because you mentioned balls,
It happens.
but there's a drink at at
And we come a full circle.
yikes. There's a drink at, and people might know about it at Micro Center that you can get called Balls, and it's BAWLS. And it's a drink that existed a long time ago, and then I believe it just stopped existing, and then it came back on like a limited run, and then it sold so much that they just started to make it again. And I think that it was cool to see that like it really is set for game, because Balls was an energy or a it was a highly caffeinated soda that was specifically geared towards gamers. And like I think you heard I think it started to go away like in the I feel like 2010s, but maybe it was before that.
Yeah, so there was I guess a CEO or whatever, left the company amidst financial issues and restructuring plans, but let's see, the company also was a drink sponsor for QuakeCon, so that's cool.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, it was always a gamer
But
drink.
their target audience was BMX racing and paintball players. Yeah, so they're also a sponsor of a national professional paintball league. That's cool. But honestly, up until yesterday, like when you pointed that out, that they've been around for like the last like 10, 15 years, I've never heard of them.
When there were really big internet cafes, because that was the thing that kind of went away, and it probably still it's come back a little bit, but when internet cafes were huge, that was a big thing that they sold at those cafes was balls. Um, yeah, and I think it just kind of like went away because one, internet cafes went away, and like I think people just stopped wanting to drink that. It became way more about like energy drinks, I think, and then it split into more healthy things. So I think the closest thing that we really have to like a gamer drink now is G Fuel, and I think the only reason they're as big as they are is because there's so many, they sponsor so many people, and they have so many affiliates with their program, so they have a lot of people. But that is even marketed as like an energy booster that really isn't all about caffeine, and I think it's like lower calorie too because it's a powder that you mix in your water, and like it was more trying to be like a gamer's protein powder, you know,
Interesting.
instead of going and buying a soda or whatever. And it was supposed to save you money because you're using your own water and stuff like that instead of buying like these bottles, and you could get your own shaker bottle that had G Fuel and stuff. I've never, oh, maybe I have. I can't remember. I thought I might have had G Fuel at one point, but you know, apparently people do think it's good. You know, there's people that are split on it and think that it's too expensive and whatnot. Um, but I thought it was really cool that Micro Center is technically like geared towards that crowd. It's really, really interesting because I think there's a lot of people that exist now, you know, like it was a very small community. Like I remember like when I was like a small child and my cousin was my only avenue to that whole side of things, like LAN parties and like Unreal Tournament and you know playing StarCraft and stuff like that. Like that was all things that I never really was like a huge part of, but like he invited me to a bunch of LAN parties after I built my computer. And you know, it's with his friends who were all out of college and stuff like that, and I'm 12 or 11. But it was really, really cool because they're all like, they were some of the nicest people I've ever met in my life. Like, I'm an 11-year-old and you're in a room full of gamers, but these are like the different gamers, you know? Like, they're not the stereotypical, like, we're going to yell at you because you're bad and stuff like that. No, but these were like the, like, PC, like at that time, there was a way smaller crowd because building your own computer at that point made no fucking sense. Games were not, there were no like new AAA games that really supported PC in a great way. They were all console ports. New games that were being developed with consoles in mind and controllers and things like that. So like mouse and keyboards were awful in like every game. Like the only newer games that were really like PC only, not even PC only, just like, well, I guess StarCraft 2 is PC only. You had like World of Warcraft, you had StarCraft, and you had like Battlefield thought about PC players at that time because like Battlefield 3 and 4 were pretty well thought out for
Yeah, yeah.
PC. They were still very console oriented, and there were still some things that they
Which
probably
is funny considering the game
tailored
started
towards
off
that.
as as a PC game to begin with.
Well, if you think about it, most games did.
Yeah,
Like
I
most
guess that's
games
a
were
fair point.
PC
Yeah.
games. You had like first person shooters were PC. Well, no, yeah. I'm trying to think if Doom was on.
Sorry, could you say that again?
Siri
I couldn't hear what you said.
Siri loves
Do you
randomly
hear what
going
though?
off. Yeah.
Oh, is it your watch that was detecting that? That's interesting.
Yeah.
Was
I
your
don't
wrist
know.
just
I
bent
think
and
I
hitting the ground?
yeah, I mean you
Oh.
make a good point. I talk with my hands a lot, so a lot of times here. I could probably turn
Bippity
that off
boppity
to be
boo.
fair. I can't remember if Doom started on PC, but you just had a lot of like I know it was on PC, but you had a lot of first person shooters that started on PC. I think Halo was the first FPS on console that actually utilized the controller, and it made people realize that the controller could be used for first person shooters, because before that no one thought that that was a thing that was possible, because they were like, how would you do this, this is so stupid, like blah blah blah. And then Halo came out and people were like, this is incredible, and Halo kind of became the standard for FPSs as far as your controller layout went on the original Xbox. And then it evolved since then, and Halo fell behind a little bit with their controller experience. But for the most part, like that was what made a lot of people realize like you could have an FPS on consoles.
Yeah.
But it's cool to see a place like Micro Center be tailored towards that crowd, because it started as a really small crowd. Like even when I built my computer, components were like not super great. They were kind of expensive because a lot of people didn't really build their own computers. Like there weren't like there were options, but it wasn't very like consumer friendly to do. You really had to have the know-how. Like you had to be you really had to do your research. Like nowadays it's super easy. Go to PC Part Picker, like put in all your parts.
Yep.
Go to Newegg, they have a compatibility thing. Even Amazon doesn't have a compatibility thing, but Amazon will only give you suggestions for pretty much things that are compatible anyway. So even if you're just going off of like you hit a motherboard and it goes like, here's this RAM, and you just hit the RAM and then you go like, here's
Or,
this
like,
thing, you know? Like
I think sometimes they'll pair it with frequently bought together, kind of, you know.
right, and so they have all that stuff, and like 9 times out of 10 it's all going to be compatible. And now you just have way more compatibility across the board, you know, even just with RAM and stuff like that. It's all more compatible, which I'm like forever grateful for, because it sucked like being a small kid and having to like think of this stuff, because my dad liked electronics and computers and stuff, but he was never into building his own computers. Like he never took it that far. And I had my cousin, but I always hated like bothering my cousin all the time if I had computer questions. So it really just became about knowing how to research that stuff. And it was hard, especially as an 11-year-old or 12-year-old, like trying to figure that stuff out. And then it just got easier and easier, and it started becoming more popular. And I would really say like it started to get immensely popular when the next generation consoles came out, because you had all these people who at the time were like, I could spend $650 and get a very decent gaming computer and be able to do things I can't do on these new consoles. Like one of the biggest things is modding games, and also have access to games that I wouldn't have otherwise had access to. And I think around that time there were a lot of companies taking PC more seriously. And I think the biggest thing, the thing that really, really, really saved PC was Steam. Like Steam sales, I think in like 2011 is when it really started taking off, and people realized they could get these gigantic bundles of games for like $35, and you could get 50 games, you know? And they were not bad games. They were really, really good games. So if you waited the once or twice a year to do that, you know, you could get a lot of people there. And they were just doing that because it wasn't so big. Like Steam sales now are still crazy good. They're not as good as they were, but that's because there's so many people on PC now that you know, they lose so much money if they did that.
So you know how you said your cousin was like your avenue into like computer gaming? And I was just kind of sitting here like pondering like what was mine, and I'm thinking about it. It was actually RuneScape. And like it sounds corny as it is, but I remember when the game came out, that HD update, the whole graphical overhaul, and I remember very vividly like my computer was like shit. I had like this E-Machines computer with like a single core processor and 1 gigabyte of RAM.
Yeah.
And like I remember it had like an integrated graphics card, I think, but it was a very, very shitty one. And I remember like messaging one of my friends on there. He goes, "Oh yeah, my computer runs fine. Just installed some new RAM." I go, "How'd you install RAM?" And it's like I was bothering him, and it was like, and obviously, if I remember correctly, that person lived across the pond. But it was like I can't really keep bothering them because they have their own shit going on and time zone differences. But it was like, okay, I'm just gonna start like taking this into my account and just like going out of my way and looking it up and figuring stuff out. And I think it was like, if not later that year, it might have been the year after, is when I actually started like buying games like Left 4 Dead for the computer, or Half-Life for the computer. And then I bought my very first processor, which was it was an upgrade from a single core to a dual core.
Yep.
And I did enough research into it and like made sure it's budget friendly because I didn't have a job back then. So I think I paid like $60 for it, and I made sure it was compatible. So it was always cool. Like that was my way into computer gaming from that point forward.
I don't think I have to really think about this. I don't think I've ever bought a processor for the same motherboard. That I think every time I've bought a new processor, I've also bought a new motherboard. Like I've always gotten a different generation. And I'm trying to think.
I don't remember what generation it was, but I think it was called the like Intel Yorkfield or.
So my first experience was in 2007. My
Intel Yorkfield.
my or 2007 or 2008. I think it was 2008. My step cousin. I was at my cousin's house and they were playing Fallout on the computer, Fallout 3.
Yeah.
And I was like, that looks awesome. And my cousin was showing me other games on the computer. Like I was watching him play CS. I almost said CS:GO, but CS Source, and they were playing a game called Supreme Commander, I think, and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, that's really, really cool. So there's one game that he showed me called Alien Swarm. And I was like, oh, that game looks awesome. I was like, I should download that. And he's like, yeah, you should download it. It's free on Steam. And I was like, a free game that's
Alien
that
Swarm
good?
produced by Valve, right? Or published by Valve?
I can't remember.
I think
I couldn't find that game.
It was developed by Valve, yeah. So it was like a top-down.
It's a top-down shooter.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was free to play. And I was like, this game's free to play. This game looks amazing. He had a ridiculously good computer, so it obviously looked amazing there. So I went home, I downloaded Alien Swarm, and it didn't run on my computer because I didn't have a graphics card. I just had integrated graphics on my Intel Pentium. So I was like, oh, that kind of sucks. And he was like, yeah. He was like, you probably just don't meet the minimum requirements.
Yep.
But around the same time, I believe I also went and I bought Fallout 3 because I saw videos of people using console commands, and I was like, that seems really cool because I'd beaten Fallout 3 like a bajillion times, and going into the dev room with all the different crates and having every single item and just seeing that was cool. I was like, I want to go to the dev room. So I bought Fallout 3 for PC, and I went home and installed it. And I got born. I made my character. I walked around.
Crashed. Kidding.
And then as I was going from a baby to a 10-year-old, it crashed.
Oh. Wow.
So I got through like or maybe it was 10. It might have been 10-year-old to no. I think it was when there was a lot of people. So it was like I was being able to play a baby, and I would walk out the door, and then it would crash. As soon as I would walk out the door and it started fading to white, the game would just crash because it couldn't load all the people and stuff like that. And I was like, fuck, so I set everything to low and it still didn't run, and I was just like, fuck, I can't do this. So I like told my cousin, I was like, oh, I can't do this, and he was like, this is probably around Thanksgiving is when I did that. Like, that's when I got to play all those games, because I think for his birthday's around Thanksgiving time, so for his birthday, he had people over, and they did like a movie watching thing, and then he played games with them, so they brought their rigs over, which I was like, people bring their big computers over? It's crazy. So they brought their rigs over, and they played. So that's when I played CS Source with them.
Yeah.
And I did a 360 op, and I failed, but it was fun. And then we played Unreal Tournament, and then I think we played Supreme Commander, and then I had so much fun playing his PC. I was like, this is incredible. When I went home, I texted him. So it was like 2 days after that when I was back at my house trying to play Fallout 3, and I couldn't. I was like, I can't play it. He was like, well, you should ask for for Christmas to like build a computer. I was like, I don't know, it's expensive. And he was like, oh, well, you know what? Like next weekend I'll come pick you up, and you can hang out here. And he's like, we'll build like your spec sheet, and we'll find out how much it costs, and then we can like ask your dad if you could do that. And I was like, okay. So he picks me up. We go back to, at the time he was living with my aunt, so we went back to my aunt's house, and I spent the weekend there. And we looked at that was the funnest weekend I think ever, because I think that weekend we did the spec sheet, but then we went to visit his mom, because he's technically my step cousin. We went to visit his mom. We went to this really amazing place that sells like ridiculously good bacon, egg, and cheese. I have no idea where it is either, and he doesn't remember, so I just like it. They're so good, and I can't remember where it was. And then we also went and looked at cars, I believe, as well, and then and we test drove some. And well, I didn't because I was 10, but he test drove some, and I sat in the car, and then. We built that spec sheet, and then we played more video games and stuff like that. And I think that was the first time I played Portal, because I didn't have it on the Xbox. Wait, when did Portal come out? The first Portal, was it
2007, I think.
Okay, then yeah, he had it. Okay.
I was gonna say it's funny because you're talking about like not meeting like the requirements for computers before.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was the first step of how I found out like I needed a new graphics card. And I really tried convincing myself my computer was good back then.
So
because it was like an NVIDIA 40 something SE like integrated graphics, and it was so bad because like I was playing Left 4 Dead on the lowest settings, and any game that had particle effects like would literally fucking tank the FPS on the computer. And specifically in Left 4 Dead, the fire was just a single sprite that stayed still.
So, hey, it's surprised it didn't crash. A lot of times those games crash.
I'm amazed too. But like playing Trouble in Terrace Town when there were smoke grenades, my computer just like freeze.
So I already knew the differences because my parents divorced when I was young, and we would spend like the day after school at my mom's house, and then we would spend the nights at my dad's house, because that's where we actually like lived and had our stuff and whatnot. And then we would switch weekends.
Mm-hmm.
And they both had home computers. They both needed home computers so we could do our homework and stuff like that. So we, they both had desktops. But my mom never used the computer, so it was like never in use. So me and my sister had a share, but she also like was always on her phone. So, which I guess I had did I have a phone? I might not have had a phone yet when this happened, but I think in 2005, I got a Star Wars collections, like game collections box set, and it came with KOTOR 1, KOTOR 2, Republic Commando, and Empire at War, which is the RTS. And I remember wanting to play Empire at War, and on my dad's computer that was here, it was a little bit older because we had it in the house already, and it kept crashing at this one level because as soon as you loaded in, there were just too many enemy units on the thing and it would crash. But at my mom's house, I could play it, and because my mom's house, it had its own graphics card. Like, it didn't have integrated, it had its own graphics card. It was a shitty, like, probably like 128 megabytes of RAM graphics card, but it still had its own graphics card, so it was a little bit more powerful. So I was able to actually play KOTOR 1 a little bit on it before it would crash halfway through. But that's what made me realize at that time that like the different computers actually mattered for your specs, and I was able to actually look at the spec sheet on the back. I didn't really know what any of the specs were, but I kind of knew what was in the computers enough to do that. So I was a little bit like technologically savvy when it came to that. But that's around the time I wanted to build my own computer, but I didn't have anyone in my life that actually like knew how to do that. So my stepdad introduced me to his uncle. He was like, he builds his own computers, but he would build computers for like corporations, which they don't do anymore. So he was like, he was retiring, but he was hired by corporations to build their systems for their employees. And now he's retired because that's not really a job anyway now. But, so he introduced me to Tiger Direct. So I would always go on Tiger Direct and look for computer parts and stuff like that. I was actually just
looking that up. I guess they're also known as like Comp USA at one point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I looked at Tiger Direct, and I would look at parts and stuff all the time, and I was like, oh, like I have no idea what any of this stuff is. And he was like, oh, well, we'll go talk to my step-uncle. Or my stepdad was like, we'll go talk to my uncle all the time, and that never really happened. So I was like, okay, whatever. And then when I met my step-cousin, we started bonding and everything, like, I spent that weekend there, and we looked at specs, and he was like, well, what do you think they can afford? And I was really trying to think. I was like, if everybody in my life contributes to this. Like if I ask my grandmas and my mom and my dad and my aunts and uncles and like everyone that's gonna give me a gift, if I just ask them to give the money to my parents or like give money to my parents for this gift, what could I afford? And I was like, well, what can we do that's like pretty cheap that we can afford? He was like, well, he's like, there's some stuff that I'll be able to give you because he had a bunch of loaner parts and stuff and extra parts, which is like my life now.
Yeah, it is.
So he well, I do that because of him. So like when I give like I gave RAM to Jesse, like I've given like coolers to Leah and like
You gave me a 500-watt power supply, and I only knew you for like a month.
I gave Jesse a power supply. I gave Leah a power supply. I gave Leah a cooler. I know a lot of like it's just if I have that stuff, I'm never gonna use it, and reselling a lot of that stuff, especially if it's open and it's like kind of older, doesn't make any sense. Like I could sell that power supply, I could have gotten like $20 for it, or I could have just given it to a friend that needed a power supply, and I keep stuff as backups, you know, because a lot of times that stuff's come in handy. It's all because of him, because he did that, because he was the same way. Unless he had like, if he needed money or he had a crazy amount of extra stuff, there were some points where. Because he's also pretty handy at, like, someone's getting rid of something, and he's like, oh, you're just going to throw that out? And they're like, yeah, and he'll, like, strip the graphics card and stuff like that. So there's one point where he had enough components to just, like, make a bunch of computers. So he made a bunch and just sold them to friends after having a LAN party with them. But, you know, we sat down, we, like, looked at stuff. So we looked at an Atheon. There's Atheon and there was Proteon? Or was it Proton? I can't remember for AMD.
Dude, I was never with the AMD crowd, unfortunately.
Okay, well, you're wrong. Because back then it was great. Back then, AMD was still kind of like it is now. It was your best bang for your buck. And like then they fell down and it became Intel was best bang for your buck because it was just way better. And then with AMD coming out with Bulldozer, it sucked. And then high end was still better for Intel back then. But now AMD's pretty good for best bang for your buck, and it's actually really, really good high end as well. So we've come full circle.
AMD Athlon?
There's the Athlon, and then there's another one. I don't know why I thought it was Atheon. It starts with a P, like Phenom.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah.
So there's Athlon and Phenom.
That's ringing so many bells, but like.
So I think Athlon was actually
right.
better. So we went with a dual core Phenom, but it was clocked at like 2.9 or something like that, which is crazy high for a fucking processor back then. Dual core, 4 gigs of RAM, because back then that's literally all you needed. Like he was like, there's no games that asked for more than like 2 at the time.
No, I'm kidding.
Well, around that was probably around the same time you were doing that. To be fair, when I was building this, is where you were having those thoughts. So, so we went with 4 gigs of RAM. He's like, you're never gonna need more. Boy, if you do need more, like you could always add it in later. You could ask for it for your birthday and stuff like that. I was like, awesome. Power supply, we went with like a 450-watt power supply. We found a case, so I went with this. I can't remember. I think it might have been a Cooler Master, but they were a cube case. So if you know what it is, someone tell me. But I can't remember what they were. But they were Cooler Master. They were cubes. It was a micro tower as well. It was awesome. It had a handle on it too, because that was my one thing. I was like, if I get this, I'm gonna want to bring it back and forth between my parents' houses for weekends where I was at.
Cooler Master or Thermaltake?
It could have been Thermaltake does them now, but I don't know if Thermaltake did them back then. Is the thing. I'm trying to remember the logo on the front. I think it was a Cooler Master logo. It was really cool. And so we didn't order this yet. We were just looking at it. So we found this case. It came with a power supply, but he was like, this is where he was actually teaching me. Like this is where I started learning about stuff. Like he was teaching me about the bronze, silver, gold, and platinum. 80 plus. He was teaching me about 12-volt rails because that's what you'll use for hard drives and things like that. He's like, you want something that has 2 instead of 1. He was teaching me about like having a brand name versus having a not brand name and like looking at reviews and everything. So like he was really, really great at teaching me about it, not just like building it for me or whatever. Like he actually like was teaching me about what all these specs were and like what they did and stuff like that. And as a 12-year-old, I always felt very intimidated being around him and his friends because they knew all this stuff and they would talk about it kind of like we do now, the way we go back and forth with it. Like I'm sure there's other people that have no idea what we're talking about and they might feel intimidated by it. But that's definitely how I felt being around them, because they would like throw the stuff back and forth. He had friends that were building microchips though, and building their own PCBs and things like that. So, like putting their own transistors and things like that. So I still felt, even like once I knew about computer components, I still felt like intimidated by being around his friends, because they were like super smart. But so, we built that spec sheet. We got a CD drive, because back then you needed one.
Yeah.
But that was like $20. I think he had a hard drive, but we might have gotten another hard drive anyway. So we got a 500 gig, 7200 RPM drive, which was expensive back then. It was, I think I said it was 500 gigs. And then, trying to think of what. Oh, and so we spent the most money on the graphics card, obviously. So we got a 6850 Radeon card, which was the most expensive. But again, that was the best bang for your buck. So when we built that, I could run any game on a high. Like any game that I thought of playing, I could play on high. Like, or ultra. Like I couldn't play every game on ultra, but I could pretty much play any game that we had on high.
But it comes
like,
down
no
to the question.
issues. What?
Can it run Crysis?
It could run Crysis. We ran Crysis 1 very nicely. Probably on medium, to be fair.
I don't think, even the top end computers.
But I wasn't playing like any game that I was gonna play. Like I was excited to play Fallout 3. And then obviously, at the time he had some games that were pirated that I got to download and play as well. But yeah, so it was definitely like really, really cool to do that. So we made that spec sheet, and then he was like, okay, let's like go talk to your dad. And I was like, but like, you're gonna help me build it, right? Because like he's not gonna let me do it, like it's there. But I was like, we say that like I'm gonna learn how to build it, like it's educational. We're like coming up with a scheme to like make sure that like
nice.
It made sense.
Yeah.
And I think the total cost of that computer was like $689 or something, or like $670 or something like that.
Yeah.
And that was like everything. That was like case, power supply, RAM. We were just gonna use the stock cooler, CD drive, hard drive, everything that we were gonna need. And so we go and talk to him, and I was like, so like, I want to talk to you because like I want to talk about like my Christmas gift. Like, I haven't asked for anything, and like it'd be really cool if like we ask everybody to pitch in to do this, like grandma and mom and everyone. And so I asked him, and he was like, okay, like we'll see, like we'll talk to everyone, will see if they can just buy any of the specific things. We'll get it all shipped to you, and then we'll do that. And so for that year, that was my Christmas gift.
Nice.
And I think the final thing was once we actually got it, I got that stuff. I can't remember if I got it on Christmas or after Christmas. It might have been like a week before Christmas. So I went back to my aunt's house, and we sat there. And the only thing I didn't do was put the processor in, because it's an AMD processor, so the pins are on the processor.
Yeah.
So it's the thing that's like the easiest to fucking break, and he didn't want me to break it because he's like, you'll be really upset. We bought everything from Newegg back then, by the way. So my cousin was the one that introduced me to Newegg, because back then that's where he pretty much bought everything. And so that's when I started like looking everywhere on Newegg for stuff. But that's where everything was pretty much the cheapest too.
Yep.
And so we got everything. He put the processor in, but he still had me like close the latch. He had me put on the thermal paste. He had me put on the cooler. I put the RAM in. I put the power supply in and cable managed. That was the only time I ever cable managed. After that, I just never do it. But like I actually cable managed, because it was a plastic clear case that was built into metal, but it was all one piece. So all three sides of this piece that came off were all clear, so you could see in the top and the end in the side. So he was like, we gotta make it look nice. But that was cool too, because when you would take that off, the whole this whole thing would slide out from the side, so you could like build your whole computer and like slide it back.
Oh, that's interesting.
It was cool. And that was cool. And then while we were there, we finished building. We started looking at cool cathodes, which we eventually bought. I had blue.
I was
cool cathodes.
always curious about those. Because those are essentially like neon signs.
Pretty much.
For like mini neon signs.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's exactly what they are.
Yeah.
Just like tubes.
Interesting. I was always looking at those, but I was like, I'm never gonna do it.
Well, because we ordered them from like China.
At the time,
so
I didn't have a case that had.
Well, so these had the windows, right? And the coolest thing about this case is in the corners, where the corners met on the case, it was just the black case. It was just black metal.
Yeah.
So we were able to hide them there. So you just saw this blue illuminate from the sides. It was
Yeah.
cool. Because there was really
Now we got
there was
LED
really
strips.
no RGB back then.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was like nothing that was RGB at the time. You had stuff that lit up. So like he gave me fans as well, because that case had a lot of room for fans. Like it had 2 front fan. It had either 2 or 3 front fans. I think 2 beneath where the CD drive came out. On the back, I think you could have 4 fans, and I think the bottom could actually have a fan too, if I remember. Like near where yeah, it was a really weird case. So anyway, the case came with 1 fan, and then obviously the power supply had its own fan, and then he gave me a fan that glowed blue. That's why we went with blue cool cathodes, because he was like, this one already lights up. But that was it. You could just buy fans of the color you wanted. You couldn't buy like RGB fans, which is crazy to think about now because everything's RGB.
Yep.
And it's really not that much more expensive. So we actually built it. We didn't have any issues. Like it posted right away, I'm pretty sure, which is surprising. We installed Windows with the CD. Oh, we had to buy Windows too.
Oh.
That was the thing. That's why it became more money. Because, like, he was like, I mean, like, I normally wouldn't do that. He's like, I just pass the same Windows key everywhere, you know? And he's like, for new rigs, I'll just not do it. And whoever uses it, they'll pay for Windows. But, you know, when we were building, my dad was like, no, like, you need to buy Windows. So we're like, oh, like, okay. So we bought Windows. So we had the disc, so we installed it. I think when we did that, because we went to Best Buy to do that, I'm pretty sure... No, actually, we ordered that on Newegg. I lied, because it was cheaper. So that came, we installed Windows. My cousin let me use his mouse and keyboard, and then he gave me a mouse and keyboard, or he gave me a mouse, and then I used a shitty old keyboard, and it was a mouse that had no buttons on the side, and I think it still had the ball. It was still the trackball.
Mm.
So when we got back home, my dad was like, the day after Christmas was like, I'll buy you like one last thing, like let's go and we'll buy a mouse and keyboard for you. So we went and I got like an HP combo like mouse and keyboard. It was really cool. I love that keyboard. Still to this day, that was probably my favorite keyboard. It wasn't mechanical. It was mesh. It's still the best keyboard I ever had. It like typed really well. I could play games with it really well. Like it was awesome. I didn't need like anything fancy. It was fantastic. But it was really cool to be able to do. Like I'm really happy my dad did that, because after that, like that's what really got me into every job that I've had. Like the reason I worked at Best Buy is because I was super into computer. The thing that got me the job at Best Buy in the computer department was because I knew computer hardware.
Yeah.
And I knew about software and stuff because I was able to mess around with it on my own.
This guy can make a lot of sales.
And well, exactly right, because at least they're like, well, he knows what he's talking about. So when these people ask questions, like he can actually steer them in the right direction and actually knows what the heck he's talking about, not just what some of the employees pretend to know. And same with Apple. Like I got the job at Apple because like I had the willingness to learn, and because of like me knowing about computer hardware and the way I had to learn about computer hardware because I didn't want to bother my cousin, I like knew how to look things up and like knew where to look and knew like what to read and what made sense and like how to interpret that data. So that's really what got me the job at Apple. And then like I'm working as a help desk person now, and that's pretty much what got me the job now, is because I'm super into technology and like I know how to look stuff up and I know where to find the info, and then I can commit that to memory. And like, you know, if my dad had just said no, I would not have done any of that. You know, like I wouldn't be into computers. Like I wouldn't have built so many computers. Like I think at this point I've rebuilt my own system like a dozen or two times. I've built like probably a dozen or two computers for friends, family, and extended friends. And then I've just repaired a whole bunch of people's computers too now. So I think it's really cool. But I think we're out of time.
Are we?
Yeah. Do you have anything else to say?
I just want to say, like, if anyone who is actually ever curious in getting into computer building,
Don't do it. No, I'm kidding.
or do it. There's a lot of
Super
informative videos on there. It's not as intimidating as you think.
It is so much less intimidating now than it was back then, and I'm so grateful for that, because I think everyone should have the joy.
Yeah, and then like that final
building
first like that final second where you flick on the power supply and turn the computer on and
and
everything
it
works.
doesn't work, it's awesome.
It is awesome. But
Listen, I mean, there's always going to be problems and stuff like that, but I think the really great thing is
the
from all of those
satisfaction
problems. Like today, I was building a computer, motherboard's dead on arrival. I'm pretty sure, or maybe we broke it. No, I'm like 99% sure that it actually is just dead on arrival, which happens with certain motherboards. But the whole reason I knew all of the things to test and try and everything like that is just because it had happened before, you know? So like even if you have mistakes while you're building computers and stuff like that, like it's all helpful. It's helpful even for people that don't build computers, like that knowledge becomes helpful to other people because you sort of can learn what all that stuff means, you know? Like if you put your RAM in and you didn't seat it properly and you hear this thing, when someone else's RAM stick comes loose, you're like, oh, it's probably the RAM because like I know what that postcode means, or I know like what it going through this, you know, like power cycling pattern means, or things like that, you know. So it's all knowledgeable. There's tons and tons and tons of videos. Find your favorite creator
Yep.
who does it, and they'll usually have good information. Tons of forums like Tom's Hardware and stuff like that have really great forums for figuring out. Like one of the reasons I figured out was the motherboard was just because I looked up on Tom's Hardware and I was like, is it? Because I was like 99% sure, but I was like, maybe someone else has another idea. And I've had those forums like save whole builds before. So yeah, you don't need a friend across the pond or a cousin or anyone to get you into it. Like just the internet is a super helpful place, and you know, for the most part, everyone's just super friendly when it comes to asking questions, and all these forums are full of people that just love solving mysteries and answering questions. So, you know, if there's any time to start, it's now, besides because of the graphics card shortage. But if there's any time to get into computers, like as far as for gaming wise, like companies are super invested in doing a lot of things for PC. Like it's becoming a very viable market, and so now you have PlayStation figuring out how to capitalize on PC players. So that usually is just better and better for PC players as more and more stuff comes out for it. So, yeah.
So yeah, with that being said, go build a computer and have fun.
Yeah, pretty much. Enjoy it. If you don't enjoy it, buy pre-built. Like, don't let anyone like gatekeep that either. Like, if you want to play games, you could buy pre-built too. You don't have to have a computer know how to do that. So,
That is true.
my name's Beta,
My name is Jesse.
and this was Two Idiots on a Giraffe. We will be back next week, with more stuff. Probably not knowing what to talk about because that's usually how every episode goes. All right, guys, have a good one.